together are discursively producing washout unnecessary, right? So we have to look at the channels and what are the ways people are talking about it. अगर सब मिलके उसकी बुराई करने लगे तो उसके दिमाग में हमारे दिमाग में उसका एक नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट होगा. We will think of him negatively, right? So what kind of discourses is being said and what are the channels being taken?
And the kind of sexuality also Shah Rukh Khan is producing in the women in
Definitely.
the society, specifically not just women, I
Unattainable.
mean all the genders, yes.
Anyway, how it penetrates and controls everyday pleasure, all the entailing effects that may be those of refusal, blockage, invalidation, but also incitement, intensification. In short, the polymorphous techniques of power. And finally, the essential aim will not be to determine whether this discursive production and these effects of power lead one to formulate the truth about sex, or on the contrary, falsehood designed to conceal that truth. So he's constantly saying in the 17th century, what is the truth about sex being produced? Or rather, it is a falsehood being produced in the name of sex. So हमें इस production को समझना है. Who are the people who are being produced? अगर आपको समझ में आ गया तो आपको पता है next chapter में what he's going to talk about. Then look at, he's saying that he of course he's not denying that repression नहीं हुआ होगा. What he is saying, then you look at, of course जब किसी चीज़ को repress करते हो तो उसके against भी कुछ resistance तो होगा. So अगर आप illicit literature देखो, say for example in the form of pornography, उस time की जो pornography रही होगी, Victorian pornography, of course they were going against the morality of that time, and the Victorian morality he's talking about. The 18th century is Victorian morality because Queen Victoria is at that time, whatever, reigning queen, and modernity is also attached to the 18th century. Uस time पे modernity आई, so it's also modernity, Victorian morality. All of this together, he's saying, is producing a truth about sex. So he's asking कि, so look at the modes and the locus of power जहाँ से सेक्स के बारे में ये truth बन रहा है, ठीक है? अगर आपने वो समझ लिया तो आप sexuality, the will to knowledge, you will understand. In the second chapter, he goes and he says कि अगर उस time पे आपको resistance तो रहा होगा तो pornographic material भी बनी होगी which was against Victorian morality altogether. But he is like, हाँ उस तरह का literature तो रहा है, but I am not interested in that. But I am rather more interested in the question how the truth about sexuality is being produced by those who are exercising power. जिनका मेन काम ही है सेक्सुअलिटी को रिप्रेस करना, वो सेक्सुअलिटी को कैसे दर्शा रहे हैं. So that's why he goes into the question. The church को he directly questions कि अगर come to the second chapter. Page number 18, बिल्कुल last paragraph. Consider the evolution of the Catholic pastoral and the sacrament of penance after the Council of Trent. Catholic pastoral is the pastoral care, and sacrament of penance is one of the 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church in which the faithful are absolved from sins committed after baptism and reconciled with Christian community. That's like as per Wikipedia. Anyway, but he is saying कि अगर इतना ज़्यादा repression हुआ है उस time पे sexuality को लेकर लोगों ने बात किया नहीं है, then जो sexuality को repress कर रहे थे वो किस तरह से sexuality की बात कर रहे थे? And he says that sexuality was all over the place. It was not just it was repressed, but rather it was proliferating everywhere. And what are the places where it was proliferating? He's saying that look at the confession rooms. Say for example, church में जब confession rooms में जाते हैं, he talks about कि how 18th century में it was detailed that the preachers would ask, or whoever, I'm sorry, I don't know, whoever is authorized to take address confessions, they were very much heavily invested into the sex life of those who are making those confession, and he was and at that time it was sort of a norm to speak in detail about sexual life. कि अगर आपको लगता है you have done some sexual sin, तो you talk about that in great detail. So those things which are being repressed, which are said to be being repressed, was being discussed in solitary confinement and discussed in detail. And then he says, and then of course he goes ahead and he says that in the 19th century what happened, this same thing was taken over by the medicine industry, and then rationality was brought into it, and then the whole question changed from morality to rationality. कि अब first it was medicine, then it was psychiatry, and then it was criminal justice. All of them then started interrogating this subject of sex and trying to produce the truth about sex, which is what is right sex, which is not right sex, and all of those things. Then legality comes, and how all of them are constantly producing sexuality. So that's the whole second chapter is all about. Is half an hour over or? Okay. No, I think I've covered largely. But I will again say, read the first We Other Victorians really thoroughly, and थोड़ा difficult होगा क्योंकि हमने when I also started when I read it for the first time in the masters, I didn't get anything. You start with not getting anything, then आप गुस्से में आके फेंक देते हो, फिर आप छोड़ दो उसको कुछ दिन, फिर you go back again. But the main thing to read Foucault is to learn how to read. एक बार आप सीख जाओगे ना how to read, then you will enjoy Foucault thoroughly because he is sarcastic and he will make sarcastic comments. So read it and enjoy it. You will love it. So, and as I said that, in order to read anything, you start with contextualizing it. आप उसके background reading करो कि who are the people that must have influenced his work. There's constantly one person. He will talk about later also, but his throughout the book is they said. Who was they said, and उनकी biography पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं, but थोड़ा बहुत, what are their larger contributions, and Foucault किस हिसाब से आपको लगता है, and to be very clear, there is no right way of interpreting anything. Your interpretation can be your interpretation, and that is absolutely right.
What a wonderful, wonderful lecture. Oh my God, I've been trying to read this since masters, and really you showed the right path. Matlab, the good thing that is others tells us what we have to look for, not just read it and understand, but what we have to look for in order to understand what Foucault is trying to say. That's very, very helpful. Like, so do you? Yes. No. You said the right thing. So does anyone have anything to say? Any doubt? Anything that you would like to bring into discussion? He's the right person to.
Yeah, मैं भी सीख रहा हूँ तुम लोगों के साथ.
I guess we will have a good discussion today, if I'm not.
If anybody having a question, or should I just ask?
How is repressing sexuality related to the modern day capitalism?
If we currently stick with Foucault, as I was saying, that he's not interested in that question altogether. He's saying that it is a very easy correlation in a way, or that correlation is being made. But he's more interested in the question of how sexuality is being produced. उस time के लोग, या उस time के, in a way you can say कि समाज के ठेकेदार or whoever is in power, they are producing the truth about sexuality. And he's saying कि look at the channels, कि किस channel से वो sexuality produce हो रही है, उसके बारे में क्या बोला जा रहा है. एक particular example अगर मैं देना चाहूँगा, say for example, I don't know whether people have done research on this one, but somebody must have done. Which is कि अगर उस टाइम पे अगर pamphlet बिके या posters चिपकाए जा रहे हो, so poster is a channel, right? So what is the channel poster, और उसमें किस तरह से sexuality के बारे में बात किया जाए. I don't know whether उस टाइम पे होता था कि नहीं, but अगर होता था, जैसे आज के दिन में अगर हम हमारे कैंपस की बात कर ले, there are so many political parties, and when they come to a particular topic and they discuss it, you will see that वो posters लगा रहे हैं everywhere, right? And then there are multiple talks. तो एक the general discourse बन रहा है उस particular topic को लेके हमारे campus में. It is being produced by whom? these particular parties, right? So he's asking you to constantly look at those places, how this truth is being produced about this particular topic.
Just to add to his point, अगर आप रिश्ता पूछ रहे हैं कि सेक्सुअलिटी का और कैपिटलिज्म का क्या लिंक है, रिप्रेशन ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी का, तो इट इज वन पॉइंट जहाँ पे वो बात करता है कि कैपिटलिज्म रन्स ऑन लेबर, ठीक है, एंड लेबर प्रोड्यूस करने के लिए हमें फैमिली बनानी है, और उसमें यू नीड अ रिप्रोडक्शन करना है, बच्चे प्रोड्यूस करने ताकि लेबर मिलता रहे, मार्केट को सप्लाई करता रहे. तो वहाँ पे वो भी ये बात कर रहे हैं कि रिप्रेशन ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी ओनली टू एन एक्सटेंट कि इस तरह की सेक्सुअलिटी के बारे में बात की जा रही है, नॉर्मलाइज की जा रही है, क्योंकि हेटेरोनॉर्मेटिव कपल वाली सेक्सुअलिटी है जिससे कि बच्चे पैदा हो रहे हैं और लेबर प्रोड्यूस हो रहा है.
Basically, sex for pleasure is not into
हाँ,
consideration.
सेक्स द प्लेजर इज कम्प्लीटली डिनाइड, और उसकी जो डाइवर्सिटीज है उसको डिनाई करके वन फॉर्म ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी इज टॉक्ड, एंड उसमें फिर स्टेट का रोल भी आता है, हाउ स्टेट प्लेज अ रोल, लीगैलिटी, किसको लीगल मान रहा है, किसको इलीगल मान रहा है, और लीगल के थ्रू लेबर प्रोड्यूस हो रहा है, कहीं ना कहीं वो.
और जो प्लेजर वाला सेक्स है and all other kind of sex which was considered to be sin, that was sort of cornered geographically also and also socially as well. To a particular, like, so for example the brothels that he talks about as well, right? Brothels में जाओगे and the pimps and that whole section, that is where you can find the homosexuals and all kinds of immoral sex. Anyway,
So we can correlate with Althusser's theory of reproduction of labor.
But I can add
Anybody
something.
has a point? Huh?
Okay, I don't know. I think we have to deviate from Foucault here and we have to take to be true the recursive hypothesis. I kind of was thinking while reading this that, you know, if we have to consider that there was certain kind of repression and take it to be true, then we can say the market consciously did that and maintained that so that they can sell sex. You know, so when there's a repression, people will be curious about it, people will try to seek it somewhere because you're not legally allowed to talk about it, and then you'll go to the market. I don't know, I may be all over the place when I'm trying to think of this. This is what I'm thinking. The modern day, most of the market runs, it tries to do is sell sex. So if it was allowed to talk about sex openly, there would be not a space for that. This is what I felt. Do it make sense?
yeah.
Is it talking about sex in terms of like magazines or porn
Yeah,
market?
everything
completely?
follow. But pornography is a huge industry. So I have to
Yeah.
take into account. If sex was so openly talked about, we don't have to go and hide and watch porn. We wouldn't require that. We'd have a normal, healthy conversations around it. So
Also a link to connect it with Foucault and also what they are discussing as well and what you are asking as well. अगर repression को modern day के साथ अगर जोड़ना हो, the best way to examine, and this is Foucault's example again, is to look at the architectures. Okay, and he says that in the second chapter he says that child sexuality को in a way to sort of to repress it, the kind of architectures being produced. So आप उसको देखो, अगर आप अब जैसे I don't know, if you right now go back and think about this kind of architecture that your school had, you will see that clear demarcation where there अच्छा इधर लड़कियों को इधर बैठना है, लड़कों को इधर बैठना है, you know, लड़कियों से कैसे बात करना है, कैसे बात नहीं करना है, you know, बाहर जाना है, like पास वगैरह आउट पास होता था हमारे स्कूल में, and all washrooms अलग and everything. So it's architecturally built sort of an environment for you that you will think in a particular way. And this is something not new. This is something happening for ages. So he is saying that
From public education when we
हाँ.
started. So,
Exactly.
like colonialism onward, like अगर हमारे देश के इतिहास की बात करें तो colonialism onward because they bought quote unquote what they say modernity.
Land civilization.
yeah.
So and with modernity these kind of architectures did prevail, did come. There are a lot of scholars who have worked. Christopher Pinet talks about it. He calls it colonial perspectivalism. What he says that when colonials came, उन्होंने Indians को उन्होंने समझा कि वो we have to teach them how to properly draw, how to properly do geometrically shape cities and, you know, architectures and how to build things. So that whole thing came through colonialism. So that's how I can connect it, the repressive hypothesis with the modern day repression in a manner.
मेरा सवाल बेसिकली मैथोडोलॉजी को लेकर है। जैसे अभी फूको जो है वो पोस्ट मॉडर्निस्ट थिंकर है।
Can you be a little louder for the rest?
ओके ओके आप बताइए।
फूको जो है वो एक पोस्ट मॉडर्निस्ट थिंकर है। तो मेरा ये सवाल है आपसे कि जैसे फूको ने एक हिस्ट्री ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी को पढ़ा हाउ के मेथड से, तो जैसे हम अभी अगर विमेन जेंडर स्टडीज़ को पढ़ें तो उसमें देखा जाता है कि हाँ भाई बुद्धिस्ट एरा में यहाँ पे इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में सिचुएशन अच्छी थी महिलाओं की। तो इसमें जो फेमिनिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव है उसका मेथोडोलॉजी क्या है हिस्ट्री ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी को देखने का इन एनी कॉन्टेक्स्ट, इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट या फिर वेस्टर्न कॉन्टेक्स्ट, वो क्या हो सकता है या कुछ और?
मुझे थोड़ा सवाल आपको फिर से सुनना चाहिए।
मैं बेसिकली फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी है जो हिस्ट्री ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी को देखती है, मैं वो बेसिकली वो जानना चाह रहा हूँ। जैसे फूको ने देखा कि वाई टू हाउ दिखा, लेकिन इनका क्या है फेमिनिस्ट जो
मेथोडोलॉजी।
हाँ जी हाँ जी
Indian context में।
इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में यार आई हैव नो इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मैंने बहुत कम रीडिंग की है, सो आई रियली डोंट नो कि बुद्धिस्ट एरा में वेदर इट वाज टू लिटरली एम्पावर्ड और नॉट, मुझे नहीं पता है। आई हैव वेरी लिमिटेड नॉलेज एंड दैट कम्स फ्रॉम कुमकुम रॉय's वर्क. Kumkum Roy has worked a lot on ancient history and she was in CHS, she's a prolific writer, please go and read her work. तो उन्होंने कामा सूत्रा के ऊपर एक काम जैसे उनका एक है, तो उन्होंने उसमें कहा कि इट वाज नॉट, वीमेन वे नॉट फ्री इन द एंशिएंट पीरियड, एंड काफ़ी और कामों में भी उन्होंने ये बोला है। एनीवे, बट अगर फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी की बात करें और अगर हम इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट को हटा दें तो हम फूको को फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी में अगर उसको ढाल के हम उसको कैसे समझे, तो मैं आपको एक ऑथर का नाम बता रहा हूँ। हर नेम इज एवरी गॉर्डन, and what was the book that I sent? Anyways, the name of the book I have forgotten. But Avery Gordon. So in the introduction, वो क्या करती है कि she is trying to understand her grandmother's contribution in her life or in the life of the family, as far as I remember. What has been her grandmother's contribution in the family? But she has never met her grandmother. तो आप कैसे वो सोच रही, तो मैं उनके बारे में कैसे जानूँ? I have never met her. उनके बारे में उनका कोई तस्वीर नहीं है। घोसली मैटर्स इज द नेम ऑफ द बुक। उनका कोई फोटो नहीं है, उनके बारे में किसी ने लिखा नहीं है। हाउ विल आई अंडरस्टैंड हर कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन? एंड she fantastically, and she uses what I call a Foucauldian method, which is she says what she does उस टाइम पे वो क्या करती है कि क्योंकि मैंने अपनी ग्रैंडमा को कभी देखा नहीं है, मैंने अपनी दादी के बारे में कभी पढ़ा नहीं है, सुना नहीं है, बस उनका पता है कि दादी है, तो उनके बारे में अगर मुझे रिसर्च करना है तो कैसे करना है, वो क्या बोलती है फिर? देन शी स्टार्ट्स लुकिंग एट हर ग्रैंडफादर, कि ग्रैंडफादर का जो कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन है जिसके बारे में इतना लिखा हुआ है, एंड शी सेज कि मेरे ग्रैंडफादर के बारे में तो लोग बोलते हैं, तो अगर जब मेरे ग्रैंडफादर ये जो कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशंस कर रहे थे समाज में, देश में, सोसाइटी में, तो उनके लिए खाना कौन बना रहा होगा? सो शी रिट्रेसेस बैक हर ग्रैंडफादर्स हिस्ट्री एंड digs out her grandmother's history.
जैसे इंडियन थिंकर्स में एक है ये सुधीर कक्कर हैं, सो वो इस सेक्सुअलिटी को बहुत ही पैरेलल, बहुत ही न्यूट्रल वे में रखते हैं, तो क्या वो हम इसको वही मानेंगे, मेथड मानेंगे इसमें?
मैंने सुधीर कक्कर नहीं पढ़ा,
कोई मतलब मैं बस चीज़ें कनेक्ट करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ कि अगर हम हिस्ट्री ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी को देख रहे हैं एक ज़माने में, तो जो यहाँ पे भी अवेलेबल है, तो उसको हम इंडियन थिंकर्स के थ्रू या फिर किसी और भी थिंकर्स के थ्रू और भी कैसे अल्टरनेटिवली मेजर कर सकते हैं? क्योंकि मतलब जो फूको है वो एक तरीके से पोस्ट मॉडर्निस्ट थिंकर है, तो और जो थिंकर्स हैं और आइडियोलॉजी के थ्रू हम कैसे बेसिकली
अच्छा, आपने पहली बार जब सवाल पूछा, आई थिंक यू मेंशन बुद्धिस्ट टाइम्स, हाँ, तो उसी मुझे याद आ रहा है पहले सेशन, लास्ट सेशन वी आर रीडिंग शंकर एगेस वर्क ऑन अम्बेडकर, सो उधर में ऐसा कुछ कहा गया है कि व्हाट वाज वुमेन्स कंडीशंस, देयर इज अ कंपैरिजन व्हाट इज वुमेन्स कंडीशंस in Buddhism and after Manu gave his dictions. So there we had this discussion about like when women are there's this separation between bhikkhus and bhikkhunis in Buddhist monasteries. So people critique that कि नहीं, bhikkhunis were somehow located in a lower position than Foucault. So Buddha was not at all a very gender progressive person. And but what Rege's, it was a book by Rege's argument was that yeah, it's true, but we have to see the context, see the time period when this happened. But also because Buddha allowed for women to be bhikkhunis, to live a life outside their reproductive roles. वो वाला जगह फिर भी उसमें था. We have to always keep that in time. जहाँ पे मनु के बात के हिसाब से women will always have to get married and be under the control of men in her lives and produce kids. But भिक्खु ने अगर तुम बन भी रहे हो, at least she had an identity outside of her sexuality. So somehow, although sexuality was not the core of the discussion, but if we're trying to connect, we can bring sexuality there, you know. So I think.
और जहाँ पे मेथड की बात है, अगर सिंस मैंने सुधीर दक्कर पढ़ा नहीं है तो मैं उस पर मैं बोलूँगा नहीं, बट अगर आपको लगता है कि वो सेक्सुअलिटी के मुद्दे को एक नए तरीके से सोच रहे हैं, जो लॉट ऑफ टाइम आई हैव हर्ड लॉट ऑफ पीपल स्पीक अबाउट आशीष नंदी, तो या इट्स वैलिड मेथड देन.
आई थिंक आपने जो सवाल फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी एक कोई तरीका नहीं है कि अच्छा फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी तो ऐसे ही करेंगे. एज आई थिंक इफ यू कैन फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी मोर सेंसिटिव टू इशू ऑफ पावर कि लिख कौन रहा है, किस लोकेशन से लिख रहा है. एक तो फेमिनिस्ट उस चीज का ख्याल रखते हैं कि कौन लिख रहा है, किस लोकेशन से आ रहा है. हाँ, वॉइस कहाँ से आ रहा है, किसका वॉइस है. एंड सेकंड, उसमें वुमेन को एज ए पैसिव एजेंट ऐड किया गया है. और आर दे क्वेश्चनिंग द वे ऑफ राइटिंग ऑफ हिस्ट्री इटसेल्फ. जैसे जानकी नायर का हम लोग लास्ट टाइम एग्जांपल डिस्कस किया था कि वो ये बोलते हैं कि हिस्ट्री में इफ यू लुकिंग एट हिस्ट्री एंड ट्राइंग टू ब्रिंग इन जेंडर, तो खाली वुमेन को ऐड नहीं करना है कि अच्छा लक्ष्मीबाई थी वो फ्रीडम फाइटर हो गई, ठीक है, सरोजनी नायडू वो भी एक फ्रीडम फाइटर. खाली हिस्ट्री को वुमेन को ऐड करके यू आर नॉट मेकिंग इट मोर जेंडर सेंसिटिव और फेमिनिस्ट रीडिंग ऑफ हिस्ट्री. इट्स मोर अबाउट आर यू क्वेश्चनिंग द स्ट्रक्चर्स ऑफ पावर. तो फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी में देयर इनहेरेंट डाइवर्सिटी अपने आप में, बट इशू ऑफ रिफ्लेक्सिविटी कि किस लोकेशन से कोई टेक्स्ट लिखा जा रहा है, फिर किससे उसको इंटरप्रेट किया जा रहा है. एंड जस्ट बिकॉज आशीष नंदी का बोला था, जस्ट टेक 30 सेकेंड्स, वो सेक्सुअलिटी की बात करते हैं. ब्यूटीफुली टॉक्स अबाउट कि कैसे विक्टोरियन मोरालिटी है और जो इंग्लिश जो कॉलोनियल सेटअप किया था, सो दे केम अप एज कि हम मैस्कुलिन सिविलाइजेशन है which comes with technology, which comes with colonial power, resources. और वहीं पे एक गांधीयन मूवमेंट है जो कि बहुत ही ज़्यादा फेमिनाइन तरीके यूज़ करती है और चैलेंज करती है कॉलोनियल मैस्कुलिनिटी को. कैसे गांधी विल गो ऑन फास्टिंग, which is a very very feminine way of protesting. ठीक है, he'll go and he'll cook vegetables. वो आश्रम सेटअप करेंगे, वहाँ पे खेती करेंगे एंड वो क्लीनिंग करेंगे. सो ये जो प्रैक्टिसेस हैं, दिस इज आशीष नंदी टॉक्स कि कैसे कॉलोनियल मैस्कुलिनिटी को सबवर्ट किया गांधीयन नेशनलिस्ट नॉन वायलेंट मूवमेंट ने. So this is how feminists will look at that.
Also, if anybody wants to read about sexuality but much more situated in the Indian context, there is a fantastic book by Akshay Khanna, not the actor but the scholar, called Sexualness. It's also available on Libgen. So, Sexualness by Akshay Khanna is fantastic because in Akshay Khanna there talks about that as contrary to in Western countries, how sexuality is an identity. In the Indian context, it need not necessarily be an identity.
Yeah.
And he takes the example of masti.
Exactly.
And he says कि बचपन में तो लोग मस्ती करती है ना यार, मस्ती में चीजें हो जाती हैं between men. So will you consider something as okay तुम गे हो, तुमने इसलिए किया है? It might not be that you are gay. You might be completely straight. And what Akshay Khanna is doing, completely demolishing this whole argument. Okay, there is a fixed identity. So it's on Libgen. If anybody wants to read, it's a fantastic book. You can also read Akhil Katiya's Doubleness of Sexuality, which is also very good.
But can we also trace emergence of rape culture to this bifurcation that Foucault has given the legitimate sexuality and illegitimate sexuality, this bifurcation? Because when we see legitimate sexuality, it is associated with virtue because it is under the confines of an household. But when we talk about illegitimate sexuality, then there is no virtue. And when if we see it in present context, then when we see that there are men, I don't think that men have any virtue as such. and women do. So can this illegitimate thing is used by men as an instrument to reinforce that masculinity, that they can rape women and also they can take their virtue? So can we say that rape culture has also evolved from such bifurcation of legitimate sphere and illegitimate sphere, if we can see it today as well?
Anybody can answer.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm also thinking along with
Yeah,
you.
it makes sense. It could be.
No, but I'm also constantly thinking when Foucault is writing, what were the must have been the social mores at that time. Of course, there were at that time clearly rape is not something new, and rape was like it has been used, say for example, as a weapon as well, much before 17th century. So in what manner, whether so that has, I don't know. I'm also thinking along with you.
But even if we see it in Indian context today, there is also this bifurcation again, because some sort of sexuality is considered illegitimate, and then it is associated with the non-virtue, and men take it as an instrument, that we can take the virginity of women and the virtue of women, because virtue is associated with virginity of a woman. So I think this illegitimate thing is giving men a tool, an instrument.
But I think even the legitimate thing is giving men the power. No,
Definitely.
like men also look for virgins to marry, so that they're doing it under the legitimate sphere only. But that is also where they're exercising their power. So
I'm sorry, can I just quickly answer?
yeah.
I just have a same count.
Okay. I'll just quickly, because I will forget
Yeah,
everything.
it's good.
So just to extend, it is just not limited to virginity, I'll say, because it is much more complex than that. Because even say, for example, if two people are in a relationship, for example, and they have been having consensual sex, and then one night, if she does she have the right to say that one night that okay, maybe last 15 times I had sex with you, but 16th night I don't want to, right? That will also count as rape if that is happening against the consent of the woman, right?
But even when she gets into a marriage, it is assumed that her virtue is, protected at the same time, but it is gone at the same time. Like, I don't know even.
She has a point. You want to respond?
Right. Why, what I think is that even by gentrifying this bifurcation, that looking at through the virtue of a woman, aren't we also, demeaning ourselves to a bracket? Like, it's not just limited that the rape is limited to women. Yeah, the ratio is more for the women, but obviously there are males as well who have been raped. Recently there was a video of a guy being beaten by his wife for domestic violence. It's not just limited to the women. I guess then the bifurcation of the virtue as well is then should not be limited to the fact that only males are the ones. Because if I'm not wrong, a male learns a lot of things from their mother and from their father as well. But a mother has a very significant role as well. And sometimes it, the proverb that is being used that, women against the women, it is also the recasting of those values that the female or the women goes through that is being recasted in the male. So a male who has not been taught about sexual education would might never come across the fact that this is what consent is, or this is the female body. It is a very basic example. In our 8th or 10th class, it is usually the class laughing at the reproductory organs when they are talked about, and it's because it's the families or the the social milieu that they live in that re-emphasizes or refocuses. So aren't we also giving them the power to think that by you are taking our virtue, we are giving them that consent of taking the power in their hand? And as Foucault also mentioned, then it depletes into this discourse as well. This is how then the society gets structured. So if I talk about like states like Haryana, which is usually said is sex ratio is less there, female fanticides are more there. But at the same point, there might be also a face of Haryana where it is the opposite, or people there have some different perspectives. We cannot gentrify it on the basis that, because we see rape, because the ratio of rape in women is more than men. So that would be like, denying the possibility that there is an opposite binary thing as well. So that's
Just to
my point.
complicate further what you were saying, अगर हम लोग इसको complicate और करना चाहेंगे, we can also think about the whole issue of corrective rape therapy, which is usually done to lesbian, gays, bisexual, LGBT community, which is I remember in Delhi there was this case happened when I was in my bachelor's somewhere in South Delhi only, where this man, there was this guy who came out to his father, and the father forced him to sort of have sex with the mother to sort of cure him of his homosexuality, and things like this is like, then it makes the whole question of rape much more, and what we were discussing much more, it complicates it further, and what
And then it leads us to also question one more aspect of how we are forming these codes and how we are attributing women themselves, like the point that she mentioned, that why is it that women are only, why are we mothers only thought about in terms of influencing our notions about orientation and notions about sexuality? Why are the mothers only one aspect that we are thinking through? Again, we need to question that aspect, how society is putting the burden on the mother and the females of the society. That's where the virtue of women is also coming in, as to the whole aspect has to be questioned altogether.
We can separate, just to add, we can separate two things. One is virtue and non-virtuous. One is illicit, like legal and illegal. So virtuous could still be culture sensitive, specific, where it comes from religion. And on legal and illegal is clearly state defined. So what law that country follows.
Yeah, like
And-
I also think of those terms, like your question, I can understand question, but another way you can look at it is like you're beginning by thinking that all forms of rape are illegitimate, which is not the case. There are certain forms of rapes which are legitimate. So that kind of will bring us to another direction altogether, Okay, anybody else?
Coming back to Foucault.
Yeah.
So I had a clarification. When you were talking about power being dependent on repression, and then you talked about powers that one can have power through seduction also. Were you like say equating both of them? Because like, in my opinion, I feel like seduction and manipulation is also a form of repression.
good question, but I was actually thinking about it. But it is also, you're thinking in the question of you are speaking from the position of who is being repressed, right? Think from the perspective of who is doing the repression. You will see that there are multiple ways of exercising power. And repression and seduction, they might not be the same thing. What I am saying is that there are multiple ways of using power to make people believe, do whatever they want. And repression can be just one way. Persuasion can be one of where and why I said that you're thinking from the perspective of the repressed person, because that's exactly what I was also doing when I was reading it. I was like, isn't that seduction also a way of being repressed, because the other person is through seduction repressing my thoughts. That's exactly what I was thinking. But I started thinking from the perspective of the one who is repressing. So I'm like, then for me, it will not be, then I'm not repressing, I'm seducing.
So here intent and consciousness also play a part.
In some manner, yes, I do.
But we don't always consciously do the repression, no? Just we're so enmeshed in structures every time. Like we may not, without our consciousness, do certain things which. Yeah.
But I think we were talking about the mode through which power is being exercised.
If I may invite, like we do it in most of the readings, how is this particular author or thinker is relevant in a personal life? If you can just little narrow it down further in a personal life, how is he relevant?
Or maybe how can we bring it to our context?
Yeah.
That's
He
another
raised it
putting
that
it.
Indian context matters
Yeah.
and personal life.
I actually had, if nobody's speaking, I can start the
Yes.
conversation. Like, somewhere later in the book, we have to put things in a context. No? He's writing from very different kind of context, different kind of time. So somewhere he says, like, he asks the question, why is it that sexuality is somehow so attached to our identity? We do not, and then he says that we do not attach identities to where people eat, what food do they eat. And then even when I was reading this in class, I was thinking, in our context we do that. We do attach our identity to what food we eat. So we cannot apply that here. So I think you're saying something, I was thinking of that. Like when you're talking about the book, where like in our context, even in terms of sexuality, it may not always get attached to our identity. So yeah, we can bring in the question of identity and how it works in our context. Nobody has anything else?
I think another side of question which is I'm constantly also dealing with, and some of you who will go into research will also deal with this question, which is how far it is okay to bring in Western philosophers and use their theories to sort of justify something which is happening over here. This is something I struggled a lot in my MPhil, constantly thinking and rethinking which scholar and why this scholar and whether they can be used or not, whether they can't be used or not, and all those things. And I don't think there is any easy answer to that.
अगर मैं प्रेजेंट कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अगर कुछ हम लोग डिस्कस करें इस पे, तो जैसे एक हम देखते हैं कि अगर हम सभी पढ़े लिखे लोग हैं और कोई एक चीज़ चल रही है तो हम सभी उसको पर्टिकुलरली समझ जाएंगे कि हाँ भाई कोई चीज़ क्या हो रही है। लेकिन इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में क्या होता है कि जैसे हम फूको को देखा है इन टर्म्स ऑफ सेक्सुअलिटी, तो अगर हम कोई भी चीज़ जैसे अगर मैं चलता हूँ तो इसके बारे में परसेप्शन है कि हाँ भाई ये लड़का मैस्कुलिन तरीके से चल रहा है या फिर कैसे चल रहा है, या दूसरे तरफ जो भी मैं पहन रहा हूँ या जिस तरीके से मैं खा रहा हूँ पी रहा हूँ, उस तरह पे एक रिजिडनेस जो है वो हमें अपने आसपास देखने को मिलती है। उस तरीके से हम अपनी सेक्सुअलिटी को या तो कहें कि ओपन नहीं कर पाते या कहें कि उसमें हम बात नहीं कर सकते, या हम एक तरह के थिंकिंग ऑफ थॉट के शिकार हो जाते हैं कि यार हमारे बारे में क्या सोचा जा रहा है। तो उसके मामले में मतलब ओपन डिस्कशन हम कर सकते हैं कि एटलीस्ट ऐसे में हम लोग को कैसे हम देख सकते हैं। अब खासकर हम ये लोग आजकल हम यहाँ ज़्यादा बोल सकते हैं, क्योंकि अगर वही बात कहें कि जैसे जब पढ़े लिखे लोग हैं तो इसको आसानी से डिस्कस किया जा सकता है, सब लोग समझ सकते हैं। लेकिन जहाँ पर एक तरह की वैरायटी है, अंडरस्टैंडिंग में वैरायटी है, एक तरह का डिफरेंशिएशन है, तो वहाँ पर इस चीज़ को कैसे डील किया जाए,
मतलब जहाँ पे लोग इतना कंफर्टेबल नहीं है इस बारे में बात करने में, वहाँ पे कैसे डिस्कस कर सकते हैं।
जी
Okay.
यहाँ पे सेक्स के बारे में बात करना आसान है, आप ये बोल रहे हैं?
हाँ।
यहाँ पे मैं कह रहा हूँ एक टर्म जैसे कोई एक टॉपिक है, फॉर एग्जांपल हम बात करें कि अभी हम बात करें स्टेट, हम लोग सभी कंफर्टेबल
वो पॉलिटिकल इशू है।
बट
सेक्स
वही तो सेक्स के इशू में हम लोग जैसे कोई होता है ना कि मान लीजिए कोई 8वीं पढ़ा लिखा है, हमारे बगल में कर्मचारी काम कर रहा है, कोई 12वीं पास है, कोई PhD कर रहा है, कोई प्रोफेसर है, हम उसके सामने भी इन चीज़ों को रखने में अपने अपने लेवल पे शर्माते हैं या फिर उसको नहीं कर पाते। तो वो जो है एक तरह की ओपननेस नहीं है, एक तरह की जो हमारे पास
एक रिप्रेशन काम कर रहा है in a way. Yeah.
I was going to answer you just exactly that only. कि वहाँ पे आप कैसे करोगे, आप फूको का मेथड यूज कर सकते हो कि हाउ उनके सामने जब आप सेक्स की ट्रूथ को बात कर रहे हो, अबाउट द ट्रूथ ऑफ सेक्स, हाउ डू यू